A black millionaire returned to his late sister's house only to be paralyzed by the sight of his nephew locked in a dark pantry, thin as a wraith. The rest of the house was immaculate, filled with the scent of lilies and lemon polish, a stark contrast to the small, trembling boy clutching a stale crust of bread. Why would a child be starved like a stray in his own home? And who was the monster hiding behind the perfect smile? Julian Vance felt the wrongness the moment he stepped over the threshold. The air in his late sister Elena's home was cold, sterile. It didn't smell like home anymore. It didn't smell of the chaotic blend of cinnamon and crayons and life that had defined it when Elena was alive. Now it smelled like a showroom, a place where people didn't live, but merely existed for display. His gaze swept over the perfectly plumped pearl-white cushions on the sofa, the gleaming mahogany floors, and the single artfully placed orchid on the mantelpiece. Everything was pristine. Too pristine. He had come to deliver a trust fund document for his nephew, Leo, a formality he had put off for too long after Elena's sudden passing a year ago. He had trusted that her new husband's widow, Clarice, was taking care of things. Her phone calls were always so bright, her updates on Leo so glowing. He's adjusting beautifully, Julian. A little quiet, but such a sweet boy. A faint sound, a scratching, pulled his attention from the hollow perfection of the living room. It was barely audible, a desperate, rhythmic noise like a trapped mouse. He followed it down the hallway, past framed photos of Clarice at charity galas and society luncheons, smiling, always smiling. The sound led him to the pantry door, tucked away near the kitchen. He put his ear to the wood. The scratching stopped, replaced by a tiny, hitched breath. "Hello," Julian called, his voice low. Silence. He tried the knob. Locked. A chill, sharp and venomous, slithered down his spine. This was wrong. This was deeply, fundamentally wrong. He didn't hesitate. With a lifetime of discipline honed in boardrooms and before that, in places he no longer spoke of, he squared his shoulders, took a step back, and drove his foot into the door, just beside the lock. The wood splintered with a sickening crack, the door flying inward. The stench hit him first, stale air, neglect, and the faint, sour smell of fear. And there, on the floor, amidst bags of flour and canned goods, was Leo. He was 6 years old, but he looked no older than 4. His face was gaunt. His eyes, Elena's eyes, were huge and dark in his pale face, sunken with a weariness no child should ever know. He wore thin pajamas that hung off his bird-like frame, and in his tiny fist, he clutched a blackened, hard crust of bread as if it were treasure. The boy didn't cry out. He didn't speak. He simply flinched, curling into a tighter ball, his small body bracing for a blow that Julian would die before ever delivering. In that moment, seeing the ghost of his sister in the terrified face of her son, Julian felt a cold, quiet rage begin to solidify in his chest, hard as diamond, sharp as glass. He looked at the boy, this silent, starved victim, and then at the pristine, perfect house around them. A vow formed in the silence of his soul, an unbreakable promise whispered to his sister's memory. He would find the truth. He would become a shield for this child. And he would bring the monster responsible for this into the unforgiving light. Julian knelt slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. He kept his hands open and visible. "Leo," he said, his voice softer than he thought possible. "It's Uncle Julian. I'm here. You're safe now." The boy didn't respond, his wide eyes just tracking Julian's every move. Julian extended a hand, not to touch, but as an offering. After a long, silent moment, Leo uncurled just enough to watch him. Gently, Julian scooped the small boy into his arms. He was shockingly light, a bundle of sharp bones and fragile hope. He carried him out of the darkness and into the sterile brightness of the kitchen, Leo's face buried in his shoulder, still clutching the stale crust of bread. He didn't let go of it, not even for a second. Julian's first call was not to the police. Not yet. He needed control, he needed a strategy. An accusation without irrefutable proof would be dismissed, and Clarice, he suspected, was a master of appearances. His first call was to his personal physician, Dr. Eris, a discreet man who owed him a great debt. "I need you at my penthouse in 20 minutes. "No questions," Julian said, his voice clipped and precise. He wrapped Leo in a cashmere blanket from the back of his car and drove away from the house of silent screams without a backward glance, the splintered pantry door a declaration of war. At his penthouse, a stark, minimalist space of glass and steel overlooking the city, Julian finally got a better look at the boy. Under the warm lights of the bathroom, as he gently washed the grime from Leo's face and hands, he saw the full extent of the neglect. There were faint, yellowish bruises on his arms, shaped like fingerprints. His hair was lank and dull. He was severely underweight, his ribs a clear, horrifying ladder beneath his skin. Dr. Eris arrived and his professional composure cracked for a moment. His eyes filled with a grim understanding as he examined the silent child. "Severe malnutrition," he murmured to Julian, his voice low and angry. "Dehydration. Vitamin deficiencies. This isn't a week of poor appetite, Julian. This is prolonged, systematic neglect. Criminal neglect." He tended to Leo, giving him a nutrient-rich broth that the boy drank with a desperate, heartbreaking thirst. Throughout it all, Leo remained mute, his eyes following Julian, a flicker of something. Not quite trust, but perhaps a nascent hope, dawning in their depths. While Leo slept, tucked into a vast bed in a guest room, Julian began his work. He sat in his office, the city lights a cold fire outside his window, and allowed the rage to fuel him. He thought of Elena, of her vibrant laughter and fierce love for her son. He had failed her. He had been too consumed by his own world, his own ghosts, to check in more than he had. That failure would now be rectified with absolute, unshakable purpose. His second call was to Clarice. She answered on the second ring, her voice like honeyed poison. "Julian, what a surprise. I was just at a fundraiser planning meeting. I'm so sorry I missed you at the house." "Where were you, Clarice?" Julian asked, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I told you, darling, a meeting for the Children's Aid Foundation. We're planning the annual gala. It's for such a good cause." "I was at the house," Julian repeated. I found Leo a beat of silence. He could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, the calculation, the rapid construction of a lie. "Oh, thank heavens you did!" she exclaimed, her voice a masterpiece of feigned panic and relief. "That boy, he is such a handful. It's his new game, you see, a very naughty game of hide and seek. He locks himself in places. The pantry, his closet. He thinks it's funny. I must have been so frazzled getting to my meeting that I didn't even notice he'd done it again. I feel just awful. Is he with you? I'll come get him right away." The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, it was almost admirable in its audacity. "He's not playing a game, Clarice," Julian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "He's malnourished. He has bruises on his arms. Bruises." Her voice was pitch-perfect with shock and hurt. "Julian, Leo is a difficult child. He inherited his father's temper. I'm afraid. He has tantrums. He throws himself around. Sometimes he even bites himself. The doctors say it's a phase, a way of processing his grief. I've been trying so hard to be patient with him, to give him the stable home he needs." It was a brilliant performance. She had an answer for everything, painting herself as the beleaguered, saintly stepmother struggling with a troubled child. She was laying the groundwork to discredit anything Leo might say, to discredit Julian himself. He knew then that a direct confrontation would be her word against his, and she was a far better actor. "He'll be staying with me for a few days," Julian stated, leaving no room for argument. "He needs a change of scenery. We'll talk again soon." He hung up before she could protest, the sweet venom of her voice leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. He was not dealing with a misguided guardian. He was dealing with a predator who wore the skin of a philanthropist. And predators needed to be hunted. The next morning, Julian took Leo to a quiet park. The boy was dressed in new, soft clothes, and he held a warm pastry in his hand, nibbling at it with a caution that broke Julian's heart. He didn't run or play on the swings. He simply sat on the bench beside Julian, watching the other children with a disconnected, solemn expression. Julian had brought a sketch pad and colored pencils. He placed them on the bench without a word. For a long while, Leo ignored them. Then, slowly, his small hand reached out and picked up a black crayon. He didn't draw a house or a sun or a car. He drew a small, stick-like figure inside a dark, heavily shaded box. Over and over, he drew the same image, the black crayon pressing harder and harder until the paper tore. He never used any other color. It was a child's raw, unfiltered testimony, a scream rendered in wax and paper. Julian saved every single drawing. His investigation began in earnest that afternoon. He started with the neighbors. Most were polite but distant, offering platitudes about Clarice being a lovely woman and a pillar of the community. They didn't want to get involved. But Julian was persistent. He had a way of looking at people, a quiet intensity that communicated he was not a man to be trifled with. He finally found a crack in the wall of suburban silence with Mrs. Gable, an elderly woman who lived 2 houses down. She was watering her petunias, her hands trembling slightly as Julian approached. "I don't want any trouble," she said immediately, her eyes darting towards Clarice's perfectly manicured lawn. "I'm not looking to make trouble, Mrs. Gable," Julian said, his voice gentle. "I'm looking to protect my nephew." He told her what he had found. He didn't need to embellish. The simple, unadorned truth was horrifying enough. The woman's face paled, and a look of profound guilt washed over her features. "I knew it," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I knew something was wrong." She told him of the things she'd seen but had been too afraid to report. She spoke of hearing Leo crying for hours on end, only for the sound to be abruptly silenced. She saw him left in the backyard in the biting autumn cold without a coat, while Clarice hosted friends inside. Once, she saw Clarice grab the boy's arm and drag him into the house, her perfect smile twisting into a snarl of pure malice for just a second when she thought no one was looking. She's got everyone fooled," Mrs. Gable stammered. "She's on the board of every charity. The mayor knows her by name. Who would believe me over her?" "I believe you," Julian said. "And soon everyone will." He asked if she would be willing to make a formal statement to his lawyer. She hesitated, her fear palpable, but then she looked at the drawing Julian showed her. The boy in the black box. She nodded, her resolve hardening. "For that little boy," she said, her voice firm. "Yes." The neighbor's testimony was a crucial piece, but it was still anecdotal. Julian needed something concrete, something irrefutable that would shatter Clarice's carefully constructed world. He thought of Elena. She had been smart, practical. Before she married Clarice's late husband, she had been a single mother, fiercely protective of Leo. Would she have left his safety entirely to chance? He hired a private digital forensics expert, a man named Marcus who operated in the gray areas of cybersecurity. Julian gave him a simple task: find anything and everything on Clarice, scour her digital footprint. But his true hunch lay with Elena. He remembered her mentioning installing a new smart home system before she passed, one with security cameras. Clarice had likely disabled them, but the data might still exist somewhere. He sent Marcus the account details Elena had once shared with him. While Marcus worked his digital magic, Julian focused on Leo. He filled the days with quiet, calm activities. They visited the aquarium, where Leo stared for a full hour at the silent, graceful movements of the jellyfish. They went to a library, and Leo slowly, tentatively, began to trace the words in picture books with his finger. He still hadn't spoken a single word, but the deep, haunted terror in his eyes was slowly receding, replaced by a watchful curiosity. He started staying in the same room as Julian by choice, a small shadow following a silent guardian. One evening, as Julian was reading in his study, Leo approached him and held out the sketchpad. On it, he had drawn 2 figures. One was large, one was small. They were holding hands, and for the first time he had used another color. A tiny, hesitant speck of blue crayon in the larger figure's eye. Julian felt a lump form in his throat. It was more eloquent than any speech. It was the beginning of trust. A few days later, Marcus called. He had found it. The smart home system had cloud storage. Clarice had disabled the cameras inside the house, but she had overlooked one. A small, discreet security camera aimed at the back door, overlooking the yard. The footage was automatically backed up and stored for 90 days. Marcus had downloaded everything. "You need to see this, Mr. Vance," Marcus said, his voice grim. "I'm sending the files now." Julian opened the encrypted files on his laptop. He watched hours of footage, his rage cooling into a glacial certainty. He saw Leo being shoved out into the rain. He saw Clarice screaming at him, her face contorted with a fury she never showed the world. He saw her dumping the boy's dinner into the trash in front of him before locking him outside. And then he found the smoking gun. It was audio, captured by the camera's microphone. Clarice was on the phone, her voice dripping with contempt. "I can't stand the little brat," she was saying to an unknown person. "He just looks at me with her eyes. As soon as the estate fully clears probate, I'm shipping him off to that boarding school in the mountains, the one for problem children, out of sight, out of mind. Then the house, the money. It will all finally be mine, free and clear, the motive, the cruelty, the intent. It was all there, recorded in high-definition audio. It was the key that would unlock her cage and put her in one of her own. Julian now had the evidence and the witness. He needed the right weapon and the right battlefield. He called Evelyn Reed, his attorney. She was a formidable woman with a mind like a steel trap and a reputation for dismantling her opponents with surgical precision. She listened in silence as Julian laid out the entire story, from the moment he broke down the pantry door to the audio file he had just received. When he was finished, there was a long pause on the line. "The woman is a monster," Evelyn said finally, her voice cold. "And we are going to bury her. The charity gala she's hosting." "When is it?" "Saturday," Julian replied. "Perfect," Evelyn said. A predatory gleam in her voice he could hear even over the phone. "The higher the pedestal, the harder the fall. We won't just bring her to justice, Julian. We'll make sure her name is synonymous with evil in this city for the rest of her life. We'll do it publicly. We'll make it a spectacle she can never recover from." They spent the next 2 days meticulously planning their attack. Evelyn prepared legal injunctions and coordinated with a trusted contact in the police department, ensuring officers would be on standby. Julian secured a copy of the gala's program and technical schedule, identifying the perfect moment to strike. Mrs. Gable, bolstered by Evelyn's fierce assurances of protection, agreed to be present. The final piece was a child psychologist Evelyn recommended, who met with Leo. She didn't press him to speak, but observed him and reviewed his drawings. Her report was damning, citing clear evidence of trauma, abuse, and neglect, which would lend clinical weight to their accusations. All the pieces were in place. The trap was set. Clarice, meanwhile, had been trying to reach Julian, her texts and voicemails growing increasingly demanding, shifting from feigned concern to thinly veiled threats about reporting him for kidnapping. Julian ignored them all. Her agitation was a sign that her control was slipping, and her carefully constructed world was beginning to fracture. She didn't know the half of it. The storm was coming, and she was standing right in its path, smiling for the cameras. On the night of the gala, Julian felt a calm settle over him. He looked at Leo, who was being cared for by a gentle, trusted nanny Julian had hired. The boy was asleep, his face peaceful for the first time in what seemed like an eternity. He looked nothing like the terrified creature in the pantry. This was for him. This was for Elena. Julian wore a perfectly tailored black suit, an armor of wealth and power. But his true weapon was the truth, stored on a simple flash drive in his pocket. He arrived at the grand ballroom of the city's most luxurious hotel. It was a sea of glittering gowns and tuxedos, the air thick with champagne and self-congratulation. And at the center of it all was Clarice, radiant in a crimson dress, accepting accolades for her tireless work for the children. She was on stage, under a spotlight, holding an award. It was a perfect picture of benevolent hypocrisy. Julian walked into the ballroom, and a ripple of silence followed him. He was a known figure in this world, a reclusive billionaire who rarely attended such events. His presence alone was an event. He walked directly toward the stage, his steps measured and deliberate. The security guards moved to intercept him, but he gave them a look so cold, so commanding, that they hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation, he was already at the steps. Clarissa's perfect smile faltered as she saw him. "Julian," she said into the microphone, her voice tight but still attempting a playful tone. "What an unexpected surprise. Have you come to make a last-minute donation?" "I've come to make a withdrawal," Julian said, his voice quiet but carrying through the suddenly silent hall. He stepped onto the stage, took the spare microphone from the lectern, and turned to the stunned audience. "My apologies for the interruption. My name is Julian Vance. Most of you know tonight's honoree, Clarisse Monroe, as a champion for children. I'm here to show you who she really is." Clarisse laughed, a brittle, nervous sound. "Julian, this isn't the time or the place for whatever drama you've invented. You've been under a lot of stress lately. 5 days ago," Julian continued, his voice cutting through hers like a surgeon's scalpel, "I found my 6-year-old nephew, Leo, Clarissa's stepson, locked in a pantry in her home. He had been starved for at least 3 days. He was bruised, terrified, and silent gasps rippled through the crowd. Clarissa's face went white. "Lies. He's a troubled boy. He's manipulative." "Is this manipulative?" Julian asked. He nodded to a technician at the back of the room, a man Evelyn had put in place. The massive screen behind the stage, which had been showing a slideshow of smiling children, flickered and changed. It now showed a high-resolution image of Leo's drawing, the small stick figure trapped in the suffocating black box. The raw, desperate misery in the simple drawing was more powerful than any photograph. Or this. The image was replaced by a photo Dr. Eris had taken, showing the bruises on Leo's thin arm. The crowd murmured, their faces shifting from confusion to horror. "This is slander," Clarisse shrieked, her voice losing its polished edge. "He's twisting everything. I have dedicated my life to helping children." "Then perhaps you can explain this," Julian said calmly. The audio file began to play, Clarissa's voice filling the grand ballroom, amplified and inescapable. "I can't stand the little brat. As soon as the estate fully clears probate, I'm shipping him off. Out of sight, out of mind. Then the house, the money. It will all finally be mine. Free and clear." The recording ended, leaving a dead, ringing silence in its wake. Every eye in the room was on Clarisse, no longer with admiration, but with pure, unadulterated disgust. Her mask was not just cracked. It had been utterly obliterated. Her face, stripped of its benevolent facade, was a twisted canvas of rage and panic. "You!" she screamed at Julian, her voice a raw, ugly shriek that bore no resemblance to the cultured woman from moments before. "You couldn't leave it alone. He was a burden, a constant, whiny reminder of a life I never wanted. He deserved it." The confession, spat out in a fit of pure, narcissistic rage, hung in the air. In that moment, 2 uniformed police officers, who had entered discreetly from a side door, walked onto the stage. They moved past Julian and stopped on either side of Clarisse, her tirade cut off with a choked gasp as she saw them. The game was over. As they gently but firmly took her arms to lead her away, her composure finally shattered completely. She collapsed into a pathetic, sobbing heap, her crimson dress pooling around her on the floor like blood. The fall was total, public, and absolute. Justice, swift and merciless, had arrived. The aftermath was exactly as Evelyn had predicted. The story was a firestorm, consuming the city's news cycles. Clarisse Monroe, the philanthropist, became Clarisse Monroe, the monster. Her name was stripped from charity boards, her friends abandoned her, and her social world ceased to exist. At the trial, the evidence was overwhelming. The video, the audio, Mrs. Gable's tearful testimony, and the child psychologist's damning report painted a picture of such calculated cruelty that the jury returned a guilty verdict in under an hour. Clarice was sentenced to the maximum term for child abuse and endangerment, her pathetic pleas for leniency falling on deaf ears. The pristine house on the quiet suburban street was sold, its sterile silence finally broken for good. Julian never looked back. He finalized the adoption of Leo, becoming his legal guardian, his protector in name as well as in deed. He sold his cold penthouse in the city and bought a sprawling, warm house by the sea, a place with large windows to let in the sun and a rambling garden for a little boy to play in. The house was filled not with the scent of lemon polish, but with the smell of salt air, baking cookies, and slowly, tentatively, with the sound of a child's returning laughter. Their new life was quiet and measured. It was built on small moments of healing. The first time Leo willingly took Julian's hand on a walk along the beach. The first time he drew a picture with a bright yellow sun in the corner. The first time he built a towering castle of sand and looked at Julian with pride instead of fear. The true breakthrough came one evening, months later. They were sitting on the porch, watching the waves roll in, a comfortable silence between them. A seagull landed on the railing nearby. Leo pointed a small finger at it. Julian looked at him and smiled. "It's a seagull." Leo, the boy, watched the bird for a long moment, then turned his head to look directly at Julian. His lips parted, and a small, slightly raspy voice emerged, a sound Julian had waited months to hear. "Julian," he said. It was just one word, a name. But in it, Julian heard everything: trust, safety, belonging. He heard the sound of a silent victim finally finding his voice. He pulled the boy into a gentle hug, his own eyes stinging with tears, and held him as the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in colors of hope and a new beginning. How often does the greatest evil hide behind the most beautiful smile? How many silent victims live in pristine houses, their cries absorbed by perfectly arranged furniture and the deafening indifference of those who refuse to see? True strength is not found in the spotlight, accepting awards, but in the quiet, shadowed corners where a protector kneels to offer a hand to a frightened child. It is the force that breaks down doors, not for glory, but for justice, and that understands that the softest whisper of a rescued soul is louder than any ovation. The world is full of monsters and heroes, and sometimes the only difference is who is willing to listen to the silence. Have you ever witnessed a situation where intuition told you something was deeply wrong, even when everything on the surface looked perfect? Have you seen the quiet strength of a protector emerge in an unexpected place? I would be honored to read your stories and thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for sharing in this journey, and may we all have the courage to be a light in someone's darkness.